I'm Eva Oh, and this is the Teakink podcast. I've been a dominatrix since 2011, and I would like to spill the tea on my life. Thank you for listening.
Good morning, Ish, from Berlin. I think this is going to be my first non-video episode because I really cannot be bothered after the wonderful weekend that I've had here. So if you hear me in my sheets, lucky you. But let me make sure my airplane mode is on. Me, my phone in bed with you, maybe the only chance you're ever going to get. So I got in on Friday because I wanted to be frank, I wanted an excuse to come back. But I interviewed a researcher on AI and a few things to do with my life. If you've been listening to the episodes, you might be aware that I am becoming an AI companion. But to be frank, when I realized that this researcher lived in Berlin, I immediately said, yeah, I can just come over. We don't need to do a Zoom. Why? I mean, following the interview, I went to maybe my favorite club night, which is in Berlin and in London, called Club Verboten, which is a kink party. And yeah, but that's not the only reason. I mean, it's a great party, but I've been coming to Berlin for about 20 years now. And the first time that I came, I was just about in my 20s, probably just 20, right? And I came because I had been running these techno parties back when I was living in Shanghai. And some of the DJs that I had booked were from here, or they lived here in Berlin. And it sort of planted a little seed in my mind. They mentioned a bit about the scene, and I was very much into nightclubs and club culture back then. And I did a lot of research. And when I first came, I was very lucky that I could stay in the studio of one of these DJs. And I went to club after club. I think back then it was like this place in Alexanderplatz on a Monday, this like hip hop club on a Tuesday, and so on and so forth. I went out every single night, pretty much sober. It was just about me alone, amazingly, dancing. And it was a lot of fun. And Berghain, I just went for their birthday weekend, which kind of explains why I'm lying around in bed still on the Tuesday. But, they had their 19th birthday. And I remember going the first year that they were in operation. And it's just amazing to think how long I've been immersed and still really enjoying this culture. And like this terrible highbrow part of me looks at this other part of me with disdain. Like, come on, really? So basic. But actually, no, it's not that basic. It doesn't have to be that basic. I think that I've been able to go for so long in very much relatively sober states for hours and hours and on for over 20 years now. Because, like, for example, I mean, Berghain on Saturday and Sunday was... It's a particular place. I mean, I don't know if many of you have been. If you've been to Berlin, you probably have. But the door is very difficult these days. Yeah, sure. The lines can be really long. But inside that space, I think I don't know if I would call it necessarily like a vanilla space or like a non-kink space, but it's definitely one of the few spaces that I still spend a lot of social time in that are around non-kink people. There are definitely a lot of vanilla people there. And I don't really go to those spaces anymore, like average club nights anymore, because I'm so used to sex clubs where people are aware of consent practices, negotiation, identities, or at least cautious to an approach. You know, people aren't going to touch you randomly or things like this. And I feel like every now and then you're going to hear maybe a siren in the background. I've got a hotel room onto the street. But I don't feel that in Berghain. And I think that's probably a lot to do with how difficult the door is. People are like on guard in a way, knowing that there is this strict policy of why you're in there and that you can get out fairly easily if somebody reports you. And so I feel pretty free. I mean, I have basically lived in a fishnet body stocking since Friday night. I mean, now there's nothing on me in bed, but in this fishnet body stocking with like no bra. Yeah. And if I went like that to an average vanilla club, I mean, the stairs would be, there were definitely a few stairs in Berghain, but it was more like really trying to control himself. Sort of like, what did I just see? Let me look away slowly. As opposed to just gawking, staring, wanting to be near, probably touching. And it's nice to dress that freely and, you know, for me, comfortably in the space and just like dance for hours and have nobody touch you. Yeah, unless you ask them to. In fact, people don't even really hit on me in Berghain. It's pretty amazing. It's like there was one instance when I was by the bar and waiting for getting a drink for a friend of mine, and this this person starts talking to me or trying to talk to me, and immediately their friend kind of like pulls them kind of back and says, "No, don't." Yeah, it's like you are to be the one who engages first as the target, as the usual target. And yeah, sorry for the sniffle. But yeah, so it's been a wonderful weekend. But I didn't really start this podcast to talk about my weekend. I started it because the last time that I was here, I promised you a travel episode. And to tell you about the things I like about it. And I didn't do that because I got sidetracked with a story about when I first went to a dungeon and I hired a mistress here, which is a great story and you should listen to that episode. But I owe you a top travel tips episode. So I know it's fairly low effort because I'm lying down. But it's at least 20 years of research. So, you know. So those clubs that I went to all those years ago, a lot of the times, they're probably gone now. Are any of them still around? I was more fixated on club culture as opposed to sex club culture back then. So do I frequent any of those? I mean, yeah, Berghain's around. But I think everything else might be gone. But when I first started getting into the routine and the rhythm of things that I still do now was probably after I started working as a dominatrix. And I think at that point, I would come for maybe like a month at a time. And before I got in, I would research where all these sex clubs were, what kind of things were happening. I probably used FetLife, the event section, and then maybe a lot of deep Googling, and I'm not even sure if Google Maps was in operation back then. But I remember on that first search, maybe about 13 years ago, I found mostly little clubs. Like, I can't believe that in that search. Actually, wait, hang on. Sorry. I'll backtrack. I have found a lot of little clubs, and then I found Kit Kat. And these little clubs were basically facilities that you could come up to, and most of them were BYO, bring your own drinks. And you'd come with a person or not, and you would hang out and use the different rooms being, maybe there was a prison cell sort of set up in a place called Two Faces. Yeah, I think it might still be around. And like a bigger playroom upstairs with like a fancy sort of bar. I say fancy, but like Berlin fancy. Like probably some gilded looking stuff, and it was clean. And it was a pretty big house, maybe in the west of Berlin. And I remember taking a friend of mine from Shanghai, who I ran into at Berghain actually the other day. And she was really so enthusiastic. It was great to have her as a sidekick in these spaces. And I remember this time we went to Two Faces. And we're there drinking the drinks and seeing some lonely slaves by the bar waiting to get picked up, hopefully waiting. And there was a group of maybe 4 who asked us to come and play with them in a room. And we declined. But there was this solo dude, maybe in his like mid-40s, a little chubby, really like not visually particularly interesting to me. But he had a very polite approach. And he came up towards us and asked if we wanted to play. And she was like, yeah, sure. And I said, okay, fine. And he played at the top, and I wasn't particularly interested in engaging with this cis-het white dude at the top, but let's just indulge my friend for a bit. And he took us to these stand-up prison cells that had these sort of chains on the walls of them, and he split us up into 2 cells next to each other and kind of chained us, and then was like talking to us. I don't remember him touching us, which I'm grateful for, because yeah. Although I could definitely, I felt like I could have easily had a negotiation around that. But I think he was mostly trying to torment us vocally. But yeah, it was over pretty quickly. I think maybe we weren't responding how he was hoping. And I mean, it wasn't really doing anything for me. It was more just like a general amusement. And then we also went to this space in Kreuzberg, where it was a tiny little kind of really rough looking room. It was a culture house. I think that's still around. And we went maybe at closing, but they were so like enamored to see our really excited selves that they kind of let us walk around and have a look. And I assume we must have gone to quite a few other spaces on that trip, but they don't stick out as much. And I took her to Kit Kat, and what was that first experience of Kit Kat? Like, I can't remember anymore. I almost have blurred all of my experiences of Kit Kat Club into one. But Kit Kat Club is essentially this club that's been around for a while. I remember the first time that I went, it was actually for a techno gig in the small room where there's this animatronic sort of dragon that spits fire. I actually haven't seen it spit fire since then, so maybe they don't do that at sex club nights. But I didn't know it was a sex club. I knew that it was like a gay club because there was only like a bathroom stall that was closed that had so many condoms kind of floating in it. but yeah, I didn't understand that Kit Kat was huge and it had the sex club reputation back like 20 years ago. I only figured that out 13 years ago. And so I go to Kit Kat with my friend, and I've been so many times since then. And essentially, it's this space that has a pool and a sauna that I've never seen anybody use. One, like, up to 4 dance floors. Yeah, maybe 5 when they open up everything. And 1, 2, 2 sort of designated dark rooms where people are fucking, but I mean, you can fuck anywhere. And like a sort of room that has these medical beds in it and a really uncomfortable looking dentist chair that I have put one person on before. I've also seen some suspension in that room, actually. They have one dance floor downstairs that they do these BDSM slave auctions at every now and then. So I'm not sure how they make it work, but essentially there are people up for auction and you can probably play with them for like a set amount of time or the night or however. So people must be putting themselves up for auction, and maybe with certain stipulations that I'm into this and that. And then you kind of like bid on having them for however agreed upon time. And yeah, and there's a lot of like tiny little corners. Like they don't always open downstairs, but downstairs is probably my favorite part of the whole club because it's these, I really wonder where the fire exits are, but essentially you walk down and it's this tiny little like hallway made out of stone. What the hell did this place used to be? And little crevices here and there, some of them with like prison gates on them, like tiny little holes, and lots of crannies. And then that opens up into this medical room, and it continues on onto like a bar area. And then sometimes they open this other dance floor that's actually quite expansive. And they had tea last time, I remember, which I always appreciate a club that has tea. And then the other way, you get that other dance floor that has the slave auctions. And then actually upstairs, another sort of dark room area. And then that loops back up. And some of my favorite nights at Kit Kat Club now are Berghain, which is this very, very diverse sex party, dance party. And I say diverse because it's not just like racially diverse or in terms of it's a queer night, but you see like the old gay men, you know, like the leather daddies around and mixing up with the young queer, like colorful folk. It's really all sorts except for super straight people. And I have a lot of fun seeing that happen. I mean, it does tend to happen that like the leather daddies congregate down the bottom, the bears, etc. And there's a tiny little dance floor off of the main dance room. But you know, you can go in there and nobody's going to sort of shun you, or you won't feel entirely out of it. And yeah, Kit Kat can be a lot of fun, but I've had so many experiences there where everything just blurs that I can't tell you a particular story. I feel fairly safe there, not as safe as maybe a Club Verboten, but I feel like I need to blow my nose. Should I pause this podcast for the first time ever for to blow my nose? If you haven't realized by now, I take everything in one take. I think you're just going to have to listen to me blow my nose so that I have a continuation. Lucky you. Some people pay for that. But yeah, and it also gets super raucous at Kit Kat when it's German Fetish Ball Week, which is usually in May. And I was the face of the German Fetish Ball 2 years ago. But, the first time that I came, actually, they were already aware of me, which is, I wonder how. I guess just Twitter. But, yeah, the first time that I went was post sex club sort of haze time. And that might have been 5 years ago now. And German Fetish Ball is very special to me because even though I'm very much more hanging out in queer, younger culture and parties that are more aligned to that, like Club Verboten, German Fetish Ball is a much older crowd, or at least it's quite mixed. And it's a very, like, older fetish fashion sort of crowd, which is a very heavy latex aesthetic. And I really appreciate the effort and, my God, the amounts of money that go into so many of the outfits there. You'll see people who are wearing, yeah, sure, cat suits, but then another layer on top of the cat suit so that they get a layering effect and a tightening effect, and then like a hood, and then maybe like something to encase that hood. It's like really heavy rubber fetishists go to this ball, and so you get to see incredible fashion. And also, the people who run it are super, super sweet. And they have a convention floor where a lot of kink producers, like kink fashion makers, tools, will have a stall there during the week. And yeah, you'll even have some lingerie people. Like that's where I first met Elf Joe, who are the ones who make the utility belt with me that I sell. And yeah, they have the convention. I think the first year I held like a cocktail for a bunch of pro-doms. That was really fun. That wasn't an official event though. And they also have up so many parties. I think one sort of at Kit Kat, one of their own that they have at the different industrial spaces. And it's just a lovely opportunity to see these, yeah, really dedicated latex folk. On the last night, they have a bunch of fashion shows, all to do with fetish fashion. And there's not as much play as I might like, but there are a lot of, kink identities that are walking around. So dominants and their submissives in, having them collared on chain, being led around by a chain, things like this. So there is that aspect. It's like more of a social event rather than a play event. Whereas Club Verboten is pretty much entirely a play event. And a dance floor also. But, yeah. I also, like on my earlier trips, I found, I think, Schwelle 7, I think it was like a learning space. I never ended up going to this BDSM learning space, although a friend of mine, Lady Mephisto, has some good stories about it. But they used to teach things like rope. But there have been a bunch of places that have opened up since then. And nowadays, there's a place that I'm really in admiration of called Karada House, which is run by someone called Karitia. And they are quite a queer lens learning space. And they run a lot of very interesting sounding workshops. Like decolonizing dominance is one that really stands out. And there's a lot of others, which is like about getting in touch with aspects of yourself, be it submission. They go into some sort of more like meditative, spiritualistic sort of aspects of how to connect with yourself and kink. And then you have the more probably hetero dominant space, which is called EURIX. Yeah. And they do a huge rope convention, maybe once or twice a year. And I've gotten tied by a friend of mine called Connor Felia there once. that was a nice experience. Huge hall, huge hall, and just so many stations where people are getting tied, where they've been learning from like people from around the world all week, and then they have this really nice sort of public tie night where you can go and watch people get tied. And in my case, let Connor do what he wants as I indulge my exhibitionist side in front of, I don't know, 800 people in this very beautifully lit room. But yeah, I would say that it's a less queer forward space. And are there any other learning spaces here at the moment? Not that I know of, actually. It's really a fun city for many reasons, but I'm grateful that they have these learning spaces. Sometimes actually Studio Lux, which is a BDSM domina bizarre lady studio where you can go and hire people to session with. They sometimes do some classes on like how to become a pro dom or how to become a dominant. Actually, I'm remembering that now. But yeah, I really love Berlin because even though the population is like so much smaller than London, for example, there's a lot of, these learning opportunities, these formalized sort of spaces, there's so many dungeons that are able to sort of operate and do so a little bit more openly. There is this system where if you're a sex worker, you have to apply for something called a prostitute's ID, which is quite stigmatizing, clearly, as you can imagine once that's on your record. So hopefully things change for people here in that respect. But there are things that are more integrated, accepted, like these learning spaces and like some of these dungeons that are full of incredible things because like I find that the German makers make heavy bondage stuff really well, and that's one of my focuses. Like, I really love this maker called Style Fetish. I know that a lot of people, especially with the American importer, have issues ordering from them, and it can be a little convoluted, but like normal German convoluted, like bureaucracy kind of convoluted. But the product is just amazing. So if you've seen in my home, I have this bondage torture chair with like this latex head restraint system, and that's pretty amazing. And then I have a stand-up cage by them already, also with a lot of bondage points within it. That's really fun. But yeah, you get a lot of style fetish gear. There's a lot of like full rubber rooms around in Germany in general, but a few in Berlin. There's so many dominatrices here. It makes the market pretty saturated, and therefore the rate, I think, is also a little low for my liking. I think it's a luxury product. People should be paying more. But there's an argument for accessibility too. I think the rate here is like 150 euro or something like that. In London, I think people are maybe operating at 300 at the high end, 250 at an average end. But yeah, and so there's a lot of fun things for my mind to get up to here, for sure. So sex clubs, there's loads of really fun gay kink gear stores, more towards Charlottenburg. And then there's a couple of kink fashion stores. There's one near Kit Kat called The Code. I forget the one that's just by Soho House in Mitte. What's it called? It starts with an S. But that's not a bad little tiny fashion stop also. And then I think Peter Domini is also nearby, which is this PVC forward space, which is, a little old-fashioned, but I quite enjoy it also in Mitte. So yeah, sex shops, sex clubs, sex learning spaces, fetish fashion, sex club nights. It's really overflowing here. And then like queer friendly, like normal club spaces like Berghain And then there's like things that I do slightly less because it's not necessarily my focus. But I remember when I came, I can't believe we're at 30 minutes already. I have so much, so much shit that I've done. But I went to like during that first trip when I was doing all of these like rounds of these BDSM clubs, and I didn't yet have, you know, a huge community. I went by myself to, what's it called again? This huge, like swinger club. Oh, Insomnia, yeah. It's really not my style, but it's a pretty good story. I've actually only been once for a normal sort of night, and then I've been maybe twice for like a kink night. And the kink nights were just in the basement. Yeah. And I didn't really have so much fun, but the normal night, so the swinger night, and which isn't really my scene. If you listen to the couples episode, you'll hear more about that. But I went to it at probably a little too close to opening time because it was fairly empty. But I walk in, and the person at the door lets me in, and like it's like, oh, you've never been here before, yeah. So let me show you around. And I'm like, don't you have to manage the door? He's like, yeah, it's super early. You don't have to do that right now. And so he walks me up, and he shows me the main floor, and like I think there's like a funny swing hanging from the super high ceiling, and it's like very much lit for psytrance. I don't know if you know what that means, but it feels a little neon fluorescent in there. It's not really my aesthetic, but I'm happy to be sort of walking around and seeing something new. And we walk into the first room, sort of on the left of the main dance floor. And he asks if I want to play. And I'm like, no, should like staff be asking people if I want to play? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And he ends up like, I think going down on me for a while. And then like a dude comes up and sort of watches really intently. And there's nobody around at this point except for the person going down on me and this dude. And like, yeah, it's like kind of hot and like fine, but I don't feel compelled to stay any longer. And so I kind of like stop things at a certain point and like, I'm gonna go now. And he looks really surprised and just like, it's like, oh, but okay. And so I kind of like swan my way out. And that was my, maybe like 20 minutes in Insomnia on a normal night with like nobody around. But it didn't really inspire me to go back. But that is definitely a huge sect and option of Berlin as well. Yeah, what else has there been? I'm not sure. It's been a blurry weekend. It's been a lot of fun, but me, a fishnet, and a lot of like dirty clubs has kind of taken it out of me. I mean, I've given you 30 minutes, right? I've given you 30 minutes of some things to look up and look into and get nasty with, right? So I've given you your travel episode, even though there's no video. You can appreciate the fact that I have been enjoying myself lying around naked and horizontal in bed. Inappropriate for Instagram to utilize this video. So you can enjoy my first ever voice only episode. Maybe there will be more if I continue partying like I just have. And thank you for listening, and speak to you next time.